What is the role of digital ministry in your church? Churches tend to think about digital ministry primarily in one of two ways. One, it's an afterthought. The church might make sure to get some social media posts up every now and then. It almost certainly has a podcast for sermons. Its website is more or less up to date with current info for events and general information about the church. But there is no thought given to what their digital presence is actually trying to accomplish, what the role it plays in the overall programmatic structure of the church. There might be varying degrees of utilizing digital platforms, but it's not a serious part of the church's philosophy of ministry. But if it's not an afterthought, the other thing it could be is everything. The other extreme is that everything is digital ministry. Instead of Bible studies, small groups, classes, prayer meetings, church meals, and more, the church puts all of its energy and resources online. They produce podcasts and online training courses, have online pastors for their live stream, and have an impeccable social media strategy. There's lots of content to consume, but little else. If you are in the first category, there are legitimate reasons why that might be the case. It could be a lack of funding and resources to purchase the equipment needed to produce digital media. It might be that few people in the church know how to create such content, so it's deprioritized simply because there isn't anyone who can prioritize it. If you're in the second category, listen, I'm not knocking any of those things that I just talked about. Obviously, I care about online ministry or I wouldn't be making this video. I wish churches did more of those things. The problem arises when online ministry is the primary ministry model of a church. I've seen this happen. A digital-first strategy leaves congregants disconnected from flesh and blood community and embodied environment. This is a surefire way to make it easy for someone to disengage, either from your church or from the church entirely. A church must be more than a production studio making content to consume. If you're going to do digital ministry, it needs to occupy its proper place. Your digital ministry has a specific role to play in your church. It has a particular function that accomplishes particular goals. Making it an afterthought risks missing out on the ways it can meet real needs in your church and community. But making it everything risks having a deficient ministry model that robs your congregants of a richer community and deeper discipleship. So, where does digital ministry fit in your church? At the bottom left. Let me explain. Dave Strunk and Ben Ruyak wrote an article for Mere Orthodoxy explaining how they saw the shifting levels of engagement with ministries in their church. They charted it on a 2x2 grid that looks like this. Strunk and Ruyak define risk as expected life change. What they noticed both in culture and in their church was that post-pandemic, people were increasingly moving out from the center into the extremes. They plotted the ministries their church offered on this graph and realized that the majority of the ones whose engagement was falling off were near the middle. The ones who were growing and thriving were the ministries that were near the edges. So they started retooling current ministries and starting new ones on the edges of the consumer and the platoon quadrants. This means ministries that do well either ask a lot from participants with a high expectation that their lives will change, or ask almost nothing from participants except that they consume the content. We often think of consuming as a bad thing, and it can be bad, but it's not necessarily bad. Here's what they say about the consumer quadrant. We don't take the consumer quadrant to be an inherently negative space, though it may be in some instances. Rather, to consume is a catch-all term we took to mean someone who didn't have much time to give, was scared to risk, but didn't mind receiving some kind of program. For instance, sometimes people just need to come to a church to heal and be seen without much expected of them. This is especially true for those with prior church wounds, and so they might benefit from more programming in the consumer quadrant. Your digital ministry should exist in the consumer quadrant as a balance to other ministries in your church that occupy the platoon quadrant. In fact, ideally, it might even be the start of a journey that leads someone into your platoon quadrant ministries. When your digital content is rightly understood as the consumer quadrant part of your ministry, not an afterthought, but not your entire ministry, then it can start to serve your church in some specific ways. Here are some examples of how digital ministry can serve your church. The first is promote ongoing discipleship. It can cover topics that can't easily be addressed in a Sunday sermon, but might not require a multi-week class. It can interrupt the algorithmic flow of content your congregants are consuming all week long with content that is actually spiritually edifying and connected to their local church. It could also encourage in-person participation. It can engage congregants in in-person platoon quadrant ministries by creating micro content adjacent to the full program that makes them want to be involved. Think of like a podcast that does an overview of the book of Exodus that promotes your men's and women's Bible studies that will be going through the book of Exodus. It can also build trust with those who are not ready to commit. It can create a connection from afar. With so many people leaving the church right now, which is 40 million over the last 25 years, having a digital touch point is critical. Some people are skeptical of the church and not sure if they will ever come back. Some are less skeptical and they just need to know that a good church exists and that they are welcome there. Your digital ministry is a way for those people to engage with your church before ever setting foot in the door. You can build trust by shepherding them before you ever meet them. It might just be the nudge they need to come back. Other goals could always be set for digital ministries, but the most important thing is to think intentionally about the role it plays in your church. It does no good to have an online presence just because you think it should. And it does more harm than good to center your entire church around your online presence. When digital ministry is in its proper place and integrated with the church's overall structure, it can serve as another way to disciple your congregants in the way of Jesus in a distracted and confusing world. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you found this helpful, we have new videos and newsletters coming out every single Wednesday, and you can get them by hitting that subscribe button. Thanks.